My name is Laura Goslin. I'm the event manager and marketing assistant here at Deque Systems. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. We're just going to take care of a few housekeeping issues before we start the panel. If you are interested in the live captions, those can be found in the link that was originally sent in the email out to attendees. If you do have any questions about that, please feel free to put that in the Q&A menu item on Zoom. Q&A during this webinar is welcome. We do really want this to be focused on audience participation. We want to get people involved in asking questions. So please feel free to put that in the Q&A menu item. If you have called in on the phone, all you have to do is reply to the email that was originally sent to you by Zoom. That'll send me a quick email, and I'll be able to read the questions out loud to our panelists while we're in our Q&A section. So please just hold on to those until I open the panel up for questions from the audience. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask the panelists a couple of broad questions. Then they're going to go ahead and answer, and after those questions are answered, then we're going to move on to the Q&A portion of our panel. So first, I just want to start off with some brief introductions from our panelists. So first we have Janine Lineback. She is an accessibility consultant with us at Deque. And then we have Berkir Gunderson. He's joining us all the way from the EU. He works for BB&T. Tim Harshbarger, he's with State Farm. He's also an accessibility consultant, joining us from Illinois. And then Anne Forrest is joining us from Austin, Texas. We're happy to have her. She's Ph.D. and speaker and advocate for cognitive disabilities. Sandeep, he is joining us all the way from India, and we're happy to have him. So we have a wide range of speakers, and we're really excited to have everybody join us on this panel. And then last but not least, we have David Fazio. He's joining us, and then Jamie Knight from BBC, he's joining us as well. So I just want to start off and ask just a really broad question for our panelists. So guys, in what way do you think you experience the web differently from most others?
Cool. Should I answer first?
Yeah, Jamie, go ahead.
Sure. You've thrown me a little by asking the second question first. Okay, so hello everybody. There's 239 speaking. Welcome to my lounge, all 239 of you. We might have to bring in some extra seats. So how do I use the web differently? I think for me, a large part of being autistic is around understanding the environment around me and understanding what's impossible. So for me, a lot of the challenges are around understanding what I can do with a page or the affordances of a page. I then also tend to get a bit muddled up with processes and doing things in the right order. So that could be order forms and order processing. Another aspect for me would be sensory considerations. So whereas I'm quite sensitive to light and noise, so websites with incredibly bright backgrounds, I can have trouble reading the text comfortably. I also tend to filter things out. So whilst I have good vision, not 20/20, but good vision, I still use screen zoom software, because when I zoom into the page, I zoom in on the text that I care about, and it moves all the adverts and all the other stuff I don't care about away from my vision. So I think that's how I experience the web.
Great, thanks, Jamie.
I can go next if nobody minds.
Yeah.
So I think the way that I experience the web differently is because I have a traumatic brain injury. I experience a lot of frustration with the internet. I mean, I think like most of us, I don't consider myself disabled, unless I absolutely cannot find my way around something. But because of that, so it's never in the back of my mind that I need to utilize accessibility features, because I don't feel like I'm disabled while I use the web, even though I am. But then again, also, I don't think there's really any accessibility features that can actually help me with what the kinds of things I need help with. So because of my brain injury, I have a lot of different things. The two main things are short-term memory loss and blindness in the left half of each of my eyes. I'm actually completely blind in left half of each of my eye. So I experience a lot of frustration when I'm searching around web pages, whether it's mobile, whether it's on a desktop computer, or whether it's on a laptop computer. And especially when I'm looking for information and filling out forms, it gets to the point where I get so frustrated that if I can't find my way around navigating a web page to see where things are, it sort of kind of shuts my brain down and kind of makes it hard for me to operate, you know, kind of like psychologically. So what I'll do is I'll step away from it and I'll say, okay, I'll do this later. But then the short-term memory loss kicks in and I don't remember to do it. And sometimes I'll miss, like, you know, deadlines to apply for something, deadlines to register for a conference, a sale to buy an item. So if that happens, then that organization, that company, that business loses out on my consumer, you know, on me purchasing whatever it is or participating in whatever it is. And I think that's really important, especially for this webinar, from a design standpoint, to recognize that people with disabilities don't automatically always know what they need in order to get around to assist themselves in making something done or getting it done correctly. Therefore, a designer needs to be conscientious of, hey, look, we just need to make this as simple and intuitive as possible, you know, rather than just, you know, I don't know. So I think that's a pretty important thing to consider.
Great, thanks. That was a great answer, David. I appreciate that.
I'd love to go next if that's.
Yeah, please do, Anne.
So I I love both comments from my colleagues, and have learned a lot in just preparing these questions. And last night I was sort of realizing that I wanted to zoom out a little, and that is the way one of the ways I use the internet differently, and I have a traumatic brain injury also, but from a concussion. But the way I use it differently is that I had no idea how valuable my brain was using the computer before my injury. I just had no idea what my cognition was doing, how I was interacting with the computer. I just used it. Sometimes at the end of the day, I'd be exhausted from it, but I had no idea. And now I have a much better sense of how my brain is interacting with the computer, how important my attention is, and how much I want to grow my attention. So neuroplasticity, how much the computer can be interfering with my brain, and when I'm sick, it makes me sicker. And how much I want to optimize against that, and how I want control over my technology. A lot of times I'm like David, where I can't figure out how to do something, and to me the website is often, it's like I realized last night, it's like an obstacle course where the obstacle course gets longer and harder and harder to endure, and eventually at times I'll just get off and I'll never get back to it. More importantly, I just don't want to go back. I want to go back to the things that feel good and I can do easily, and not go back to the things that I just couldn't even get out of the obstacle course and had to turn it off. So I also don't identify as someone with a disability, and part of that is that I didn't have a coma and had very slow treatment to help after a concussion.
Great, thank you so much, Anne.
Can I quickly pop just a quick comment in on that?
Yeah, go for it.
So with what Anna's saying and what David's saying, I think we both have this focus that when we come to a web page, there's a certain amount of energy we have.
Right.
And if we can't complete what we've got to do with the energy we have at that moment, our capacity, so to speak, it simply won't get done. So the idea of an obstacle course or some sort of challenge to overcome is a very good analogy. And it can be, the barriers can be as simple as on a media player that I use often, the grayed out buttons might mean that they don't want them to be obvious, or it might mean that they're disabled, but you can't tell the difference so easily. So all of those sorts of things, all of the little challenges, they add on top of each other. So whilst individually an issue may be small, it can become incredibly disabling and blocking when they're added together.
And I'd like to add on to what Jamie and is it Anna are both saying also. You know, I've noticed this about myself as well, and I don't know if it's because of the vision issue that I have, because of the brain injury that I have, or if this is common in all people. But to reiterate what Jamie's saying, yeah, you know, so I notice myself getting fatigued very easily when I have to process a lot of visual information. So, and it's not just with the computer, it's in everyday life also. So my girlfriend and I had just got done visiting a museum in Costa Rica after the Accessible Americas conference that just took place. It's the 4th edition of it. And I'm going around reading the different exhibit sites, and they actually had, it was this jade museum, and it actually had interactive displays where you could press a button and it would tell you a story and speak to you both English and Spanish and stuff like that. It was pretty cool. But the more that I had to read, the more exhausted and fatigued I became. And, internet pages, web pages and stuff like that have a way of exacerbating that, because it's all visual information, and it's sometimes it could be so cluttered or so just discombobulated or thrown all over the place that it makes it really, really tough. And the more fatigue you get, the less you want to continue, right? And as a business, you want to get people to use those pages and to use them what they're for, and not to just wear them down and exhaust them. So I think that's really important to take note of.
And managing one's energy is incredibly important towards getting better and managing one's day. And so your point of how much energy is being taken out of your system is a huge one when things are hard to understand cognitively, or they involved a lot of integration of information and increase the processing that a human being has to do. So there are all kinds of issues there. Thank you, David, for spelling that out a little bit more.
This is Janine, and I just want to say that I'm totally blind, and the way I use the web or a mobile device, an app, is by the use of a screen reader. But one of the things that strikes me as I hear my wonderful colleagues talk and I learn about their circumstances and their challenges and how they overcome them is that we have a lot in common, in that if the website is very, very complex in nature, hard to navigate, the design is very cluttered, the language is very, well, I don't know the right word, but let's just say complex for lack of a better one. And one of the ways that I tackle that is that I also use a Braille display, because when I'm looking at things all day long for my job, and then I have to do things on the computer for my normal life, like pay my bills, since I don't read paper, I typically pay my bills online, either with my phone or with the computer. I don't have the energy to listen all day long to everything. My ears literally ring at the end of the day if I have not been using my Braille display. Whereas if I combine the two, it's kind of like what Jamie said with the Zoom feature, where he can sort of focus out of what he doesn't need to see so that he can keep his attention where it needs to be. And that's one of the ways that I manage that, is not having to totally listen to everything all the time.
Well, something I just wanted to make a note of. You said about the two ways of accessing content. So for you, it's Braille and screen readers. For me, it's visual and screen readers. So I'm quite a heavy screen reader user, not because I can't see the text, but because I need to give my eyes a break. I need to access the information a different way. I also find it incredibly useful to have it read what I'm reading to me, because some words I only understand as sounds. And if I read them and spell them out, they don't have the same meaning. So by having almost two sources of information, I can then integrate it a lot easier than getting a bit lost. And it helps with the fatigue as well. So yeah, that sounds really familiar to me as well. Maybe I should go and learn Braille.
It's really great to hear how all of these all your different experiences are overlapping, and how, maybe people, like myself, we wouldn't think about how different it is to use the web and to have energy displacement in all these different ways. So I appreciate you all sharing that. I just want to pass along to maybe Tim or Sandeep or Bakir, who are joining us, maybe get their input a little bit as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about, since I'll grab it, just because I think a lot of this discussion is really just confirming, well, we all know that accessibility is really just good user experience. As a blind person with a screen reader, I mean, Janine described it really well. I rely heavily on Braille as well. And by the way, if you're coding a website, you don't have to think about the Braille experience per se. You don't have to code for Braille. Leave it to the screen reader to handle the Braille output. Just make sure your content is structured. But the key things for me is, as a blind person, I don't like new websites because a new website means I have to look all over the page, I have to explore it, understand how it fits together. I'm really comfortable with websites that are consistent. So if you use a consistent heading structure or data or appearance or labels across all the pages of the site, I quickly lean towards those because I get familiar, I feel comfortable using them, they're predictable. No matter what page on the site I go to as a news page on a news site or something else, I know what to look for and know how to jump to the main content. So I really like simple websites that are well structured, and especially they are consistent from page to page, as long as the pages are a certain category or something. And a lot of people say that dynamic web is bad for accessibility. It's all about, just like everything else, it's all about how it's used. Dynamic web can actually be great for accessibility. I'm a big fan of tabs that are implemented correctly, because they hide information from you that you don't need on the page, but you can still access it if you want to. Say if you have to provide one of three addresses, home, work, or say other, instead of showing all three addresses with the fields, city, state, phone number, and I have to fill in one of them. If you tap them so that only the one I'm interested in filling in is visible at a time, I'm much more comfortable interacting with the page. So it's just an example of how dynamic information reduces the information overload and the information displayed on the page, which really does lead to a better experience. Of course, the devil in the details is implementing the tabs correctly so screen readers understand them. Because if you don't, you could completely ruin it and actually hide all of this information from these users.
And this is Tim. And Burkur, I think the one thing you're talking about too, I think is about, for those of us who are blind, one of the things that's different about our experience than most people, that's different than most, is we have to depend a lot on our memory. Our experience of a web page tends to be linear. You may look at a web page and say, oh, there's a banner at the top, and there's some site navigation up there, and there's a left nav, and there's content, and all that stuff. And you're looking around the screen. I think from my experience, it tends to be linear. Everything is either, I can talk to you about the top banner or stuff like that, and I know what those mean, but my experience tends to be the banner is before the left nav. The left nav is before the main content, right? But then a lot of it is memory, because I can't just gaze at the top of the screen and say, gee, I can't find what I'm looking for. Well, I'll just look around the screen and look for it. I have to actually remember everything that it's read before. So sites that are consistent, new sites are always a problem because there's a lot of stuff you have to commit to memory and figure out what's important and how to use it. Where if you use something you're familiar with, you don't have to commit a lot of new stuff to memory and try to figure out where it belongs.
I think this segues into a broader industry trend at the moment towards stuff like design systems. So at the BBC, we define a pattern as anything that you learn once and can use multiple times. So light switches are patterns and door handles are patterns. And patterns on the web are really powerful because if you learn the pattern once, you can use it across multiple websites, multiple things. So one of the kind of trends in web design that I'm really enjoying is the move towards design systems. Because if I can use, for example, if I can use one BBC website, I can use any BBC website because they're all the same patterns, all built out of the same nuts and bolts. And I'm guessing that would help our blind colleagues as well.
And with TBI, although sometimes recognizing a pattern is part of the difficulty that I experience anyway with the TBI, I can take a long time to recognize it. That's all learning by doing. We've talked both about processing information and learning by doing. And oftentimes learning by doing is really hard when there isn't consistency because like you pointed out earlier, you don't know if something's off, why it's off, or if you can't solve it, you don't learn anything from it, right? And so I like that idea. Consistency is also important for me, but also especially in personalization, which I'm just beginning to learn, having somebody else train me so that I can actually learn and replicate.
So this is one of the interesting, so I'm also a design consultant myself. It's part of what my company does, Helix Opportunity, but there's a way of designing that that I teach called biofeedback, to where you can, I think it was Anne, you mentioned before neuroplasticity. So all throughout our lives, our brains continue to reshape our neural pathways, how we remember information and how it gets across to our brain and things like that. You can actually increase a user's cognition, their ability to remember something or to solidify that pattern through biofeedback. If you create a pleasurable response at the end of someone completing a task, whether it be making them laugh, whether it be making them enjoy it, making them smile, but any kind of pleasurable response that creates a release of one of the 5 major pleasure chemicals: endorphins, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, or anything like that. You solidify that response in the user's brain, and it solidifies that neural connection, tells them that's a response that they need to remember, that's strong, that's powerful. And the more you do that, the more you solidify that behavior into their brain. So
as opposed to the obstacle course that you can't get through and then you stop. So yeah, great, thanks.
And I also wanted to add something else. So there was a study done about 8 or 9 years ago that was really good about how people use the web. And I know there's a recent one done in the UK, but it's a little bit different. So the study shows that people with disabilities use the web a less amount of time than people without disabilities to make online purchases. However, when we do make purchases online, we spend the same amount of money as people without disabilities, right? However, the majority of the web is inaccessible. So if you think about that, if the web were more accessible, we would be spending an exponentially more amount of money on the web. The other thing that this study revealed is that users with disabilities that use the web for shopping use it for convenience, right? However, convenience means something completely different to a user that uses a screen reader, because it's not really convenient for them having to read an entire web page just to make an online purchase. Whereas they could go to a store and just tell somebody what they want and have that person get it for them and make it much faster. So these are implications that designers need to understand and need to be aware of, because if we're going to use something for convenience, it's not really convenient if it's taking us forever to use.
Great, thanks, David. I just want to direct it over to Sandeep real quick and to get his input. And then I think we'll transition into our next broad question.
Okay. Almost the same as every other panelist just said. I have low vision, and with blurred vision with whatever I have. So it's difficult for me to identify what's on a web page. So I basically use a screen reader to read whatever is on the web. And it all comes back. I can just summarize what all other panelists just said. That would help me better browse the web.
Great, thanks so much. So I think this is a really good time, from all the use cases that we've heard of, to transition into the next question, which is, what apps, sites, or features do you all find useful or that you use frequently that are considered important to you when you're using the web?
Should I go first and then shut up?
No, you can go ahead. Thank you. Please go ahead.
The most important app that I use, which I'm going to show you in a moment, is an app called Proloquo for Text. Because whilst it's going to sound a bit weird, as everybody on this call has heard me speak, my speech is really difficult. And this is the application. And what it does is when I type, it turns what I type into speech. Now, to a lot of people, that might seem like it's only useful when I'm unable to speak. But another way of thinking about it is it's an ability to always communicate that is always with me. So by having something with me all the time that enables me to communicate, it takes all of the pressure off of my speech, which takes all of the anxiety away from the speech. So in actual fact, by having better tools to deal with when I can't speak, I get more autonomy and more independence, because it means that I'm more likely to be able to speak. So this is kind of like, I don't know, if my phone was destroyed tomorrow, the reason I would buy one within 2 hours, almost at any cost, would be to regain access to that app, because it's the key to the rest of my life. Because without communication, I can't have effective autonomy. I can't make decisions and communicate them. So that's the app that I think is the most important to me. For the person asking, the application is called Proloquo for Text, and it's made by Assistiveware. I've got ideas for sites and features as well, but I'll let someone else talk.
I'd like to I kind of use something similar, although it's not an app. So I don't download apps because, like I said before, I don't think that there's any kind of accessibility app that would actually assist me. I don't know, maybe there is or maybe there isn't. Maybe I'm in denial about needing accessibility, features for the web. But two things that I use religiously, features actually. One of them is the is Macintosh Pages text to speech. So I have a journalism and a film degree. I'm a writer by blood, by passion, by education, and professionally. However, because of my vision issue, I'm prone to making typos, and I'm prone to missing those typos when I'm proofreading. So what I'll do is whenever I'm writing a new article, whenever I'm creating a publication for a client, because like I said, I'm also a consultant, what I do is in my pages, I highlight all of the text, and just by happenstance, I realized one day, years ago, that if you right-click in the Pages application through highlighted text, it gives you an option that says speech. And when you go over to the arrow of speech, it allows it to read everything back to you. So I use that religiously to edit anything that I write, or also to time it to make sure that I'm within a good time frame of, let's say I've got 10 minutes to speak on a topic at a conference or whatever. I use that to time how long my presentation is going to be. I use it to find any kind of typographic errors, any kind of formatting errors. Because also whenever I create a publication that I'm speaking, I indent spaces to go with to tell myself when to take breaks to breathe, when to pause, and things like that. However, it's not available in Microsoft Outlook, which is problematic to me. And Microsoft Word offers something similar, but it's more difficult to access. You have to go to accessibility features, you have to download it into an audio file, and then you have to play that audio file through iTunes or something like that. So because of all of that extra work that I have to do, I don't even use Microsoft Word to utilize that kind of function. I just use my Mac Pages.
I have good news for you. There's a system-wide OS 10 shortcut that will read any text that you can select. I'll show you it later.
For Word or for?
Everything. Any text that's selectable can be read with this shortcut, but you need to go and enable system preferences. So I'll show you that later. It works on iOS as well.
And it's great that Jamie brings this up, because if it's not easy for us to find, we're not going to use it. You know what I mean? That's the other issue with these features. Make it blatant and readily apparent that this is how it's going to help you, rather than hiding it as an accessibility feature or this or that or whatever. That's really important also. And the other thing that I use, especially on my phone, because there's a lot of unresponsive web pages, and whenever you use it on your phone, it distorts the formatting of things. It cuts off some text, it rearranges things. So I use the zoom feature with my fingers a lot to have control of the way that text and images are formatted on my phone, so that I could read it to the best of my ability, because I read kind of slanted because of the blindness in each of the left half of my eyes. I look at everything with an angled slant. So I use a lot of zoom over and stuff like that.
Great, thanks, David. And hey, guys, just a friendly reminder, before you answer the question, could you just give a brief, hey, this is David speaking, just so the people listening know who's speaking on the panel. But thank you, Jamie, for adding that helpful hint for David. That is a really interesting technology, and I'm excited to look into that and explore that as well. So, hey, Anne, why don't you go next? Do you have any technologies that you find really helpful when you're using the web?
You called me out. It's Anne, right? You
Yeah.
called me out. I quite hear that. So I have three things to say something about, and one is, so I entered the open air contest that Knowbility here in Austin does every year to make websites more accessible, and I during that process, Sharon Rush, the head of Knowbility, told me about Twitter. And Twitter just opened up the world for me. What she said was it was very accessibility, and what I found was that I could get research that I literally was much more isolated, and because I couldn't, looking at just filtering out information on a website of what was important, what wasn't. That was a lot of work for me, a lot of cognitive energy, and I didn't want to use it that way. So Twitter's just opened up the world for me. The fact that it's 160 characters meant that I could access research, and I could also do a lot of practicing of learning how to Twitter myself, and that was good cognitive rehab to get things down to 160 characters. So I feel like Twitter's contributed to my own neuroplasticity and flexibility and thinking. The second thing is that the reason I entered the Knowbility Open Air contest was because I worked with John Slayton at the University of Texas early on, who helped me get onto the computer. And he had been one of the founders of that. And I wanted my website, I knew I needed to have an accessible website. One of the ironies to me was that people with traumatic brain injury often can't read the websites that are supposed to enable them with information about a traumatic brain injury, and parents have told me that they're so stressed out after an injury that often they can't read a website either. And I worked on my website, www.a Plastic Brain, and I worked with Joseph Carr O'Connor, who's a web accessibility person, and then a team from Cognizant was matched with them. We worked on color, simplicity, how to find yourself when you're lost, or not be lost. We worked on left side controls, which were helpful for me because on the left side of the screen is where I process more. And ironically, I will say that it's my difficulties as a person with a cognitive disability to make that some of the text accessible, and now getting a picture up. So I've got my own issues of learning how to, because my new learning is slow, getting that more cognitively accessible. And then the third app that I want to suggest is the Defense Centers of Excellence have a great app that's called Breathe to Relax, and 2 is spelled as the number 2. With a TBI, increased stress can make it even more difficult for my brain to process information or learn new things, and so managing my stress is really important. Really like that app because it is short, sweet, easy, and I can figure out what I'm doing, and as David was saying, I feel good afterwards. So it's stimulating those dopamine, endorphins, whatever, that will create neuroplasticity and makes me want to go back to it.
A quick one for David as well. There's an app called Brain in Hand that we have in the UK. I'm just texting a link to it into the chat room now for everyone. Brain in Hand is a tool for supporting people with memory loss and anxiety, ordering and executive function. I know the team behind it, and they're very, very friendly. It doesn't work very well for me, but it's certainly working well for other people. So that might be an application that might be useful to you. And other
Check
people.
Great, thanks, Jamie, and thank you, Anne, for all those helpful apps, especially as they relate to neuroplasticity and how you process information. That's new information for me personally, so I appreciate you sharing that. Sandeep, do you have any apps or web applications that you find particularly useful and helpful to you?
When using, I mainly use screen reader because even the little vision which I have is pretty blurry. So I use NVDA screen reader for the desktop and mobile, since it's first of all a small device and you can hold it very close to your eye. I actually use the magnification feature that is available. And if I have to read very long articles or anything like that, I prefer to use the TalkBack screen reader that comes built in the mobile.
Great.
And that's about it.
Great. Appreciate you sharing that.
This is
Tamara.
Janine.
Oh,
I'm
good.
sorry. I just have a really favorite app that I hope people know about. It's for iOS, and it's free, and it's called Seeing AI. And for anyone who is blind or has difficulty reading long amounts of printed text for whatever reason, it's from Microsoft. It's for iOS, and I believe that they're working on an Android version, but I don't think they're there yet. But the iOS version is fabulous, and what it does is it provides access to printed material that maybe your screen reader can't get to. So if something is an image, but it's actually, words done as a picture, even if it's on the computer, your screen reader is not necessarily going to be able to read that. With Seeing AI, you can actually use the camera on your phone and you just basically swipe like I'm going to do right now. You just swipe the back of your phone with the camera across the screen, and it will automatically start reading. I've used it in the airport and looking for a place to eat, and it's fabulous because you just kind of move it around and it starts telling you all kinds of stuff that it sees. It's almost like having a little eyeball in your hand. And for me, being blind, and I travel a lot and things like that, and then not having someone sighted at my elbow all the time, it's super handy. I've found that I really love it, and that it's useful to a lot of my friends because there's no expense there. It's totally free. So that's one of my app tips.
Thanks for bringing that, Janine. Yeah, I also would like to add about the same app. It not only tells what things are around, it also describes them. For example, if a person is happy, it says a man aged 35 is looking happy with probably black hair. And it describes that too.
The app,
That's
someone asked
just
what the
amazing.
app was. It's Seeing AI.
Great, thank you, Janine.
I'm a stickler for data and stuff like this. This is David Fazio, by the way, and I think it's really important to talk about the positive data that we have available because there's so much negative stuff out there. People with disabilities have a hard time with this, we're in poverty, we're this, we're that. But I just want to add thanks for talking about your travel, Janine, because Janine, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
so people with disabilities spent $70 billion on travel over the last 2 years, and the majority of that travel was inaccessible and not friendly to people with disabilities. So again, as I said with the web purchasing, imagine what would happen if we created more accessible and more friendly travel experiences for people with disabilities, incorporating features like this. Technology has a way of really making the physical environment much more friendly and suitable to people with disabilities in really innovative ways. So looking for ways to marry technology with the physical environment is the way of the future. And I just want to add that in there and just imagine how much more money we would be spending on travel if that travel was friendly, accessible, and accommodating to us. That's all.
Just to, this relates to some of the stuff, the changes that I've made in my life over the last couple of years. One of the things that was really key to me was to understand the difference between autonomy and independence.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was growing up, I always aimed for independence, which is the process of making a decision and completing the decision yourself. But what would end up happening is like I'd do something like I'd be independent for making food, but it would take 50 or 60% of my energy for the whole day to cook a basic pasta meal. So in my life, I actually made the decision to be less independent in order to have more autonomy. So autonomy is where I'm making decisions about my life, whether or not I can complete them myself or not. And this distinction, this understanding that in some parts of my life it's more efficient to have autonomy than to have strict independence, and then to rely on the support of others and the support of the people around me was very difficult to make. And some of that actually gets easier with technology. So over the weekend, we travelled to Sweden, which was only my third or fourth commercial flight. I think I've spent as much time, I think I've had as many flights in a plane that I'm flying as one that I'm the passenger on. It's getting pretty close, which is a worrying statistic to have in your life. For this trip, I had a friend with me taking me through the airport. And I was expecting to be completely dependent on him for knowing where to go. But because they had this color-coded signs and this autism-friendly airport, I was able to navigate. And I found the gate, and I can remember how proud I felt when I was like, it's this gate, it's over here. Because I'd never been that capable within an airport before. So it gave me both a boost of autonomy, but also, you know, it was fun. It was a happy adventure rather than a task that I was dreading.
Thanks, Jamie. I really like that analogy and that story. I think it really brings together what David and Janine were saying, and I really appreciate that story. Tam or Bakir, do you have any other applications, any features that you find really useful? And then after this question, we'll move on to audience questions.
I'll let Tim go first since I went first last time.
Okay.
Thanks, Bakir. Really, I don't really have much to add other than, for me, I consider lots of things important to be able to use. So, for instance, I had some lab tests done recently at the hospital, and they provided the results online where I could read that information, and it was fairly accessible. Banking, things like that. Those are all things, I mean, honestly, they're critical for me to be able to, do things by myself to make decisions about, things and what I do at grocery shopping. I use apps to do grocery shopping online and have stuff delivered to my house because it's a whole lot easier than trying to arrange times that are convenient for me and other people to go to the grocery store to get those things done. So those are some things I do.
Great.
Gosh, thanks for the shout out to banking. That makes a huge difference for me, not having to, especially I didn't drive for 15 years of my life after injury, and just getting to the bank and by bus or later by taxi, accessible taxi. But I just can't believe every time I deposit a check where I can do it easily and with an app that works. I'm thankful for that shout out. So thanks.
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate that answer. And by the way, for people who are asking in the chat, we will provide a list of all the apps and resources that people find useful so that you can use them in the future, and we'll email those out. So, okay, I think it would be a good time now to transition. We have a little bit, about 20 minutes left for some audience questions. So let me see if I can find one here.
Well, I'll jump in with a little commentary on the comments. It's pretty clear.
Sure.
I'm lucky enough to have, what I call a sighted guide wife. So a lot of the challenges of the home life, the cooking, the purchasing, buying groceries and stuff, I just have to leave it to her and concentrate 110% on my job and getting around. This wasn't like that before when I was living by myself for quite a while. And I really like the discussion of autonomy versus independence, because I decided to concentrate on my job and I kept relying a lot on other people for laundry and shopping. I just hired a half-time assistant and spent a third of my salary on it, but I think it was worth every penny. The real game changers for me is the marrying of GPS and mobile technology, things like Uber. All of a sudden, I can go anywhere in any city. I probably spend about $400 a month on Uber now because I can commute to work. I actually don't live in Europe. I live in North Carolina at the moment, although I work a lot in Europe. But the ability to jump to meetings, go to a place, go to anywhere from anywhere is just amazing. I have this whole independence. I don't have to learn the bus routes and wait for people to pick me up. Taxi services are not great. So that is the thing I'm most excited about in terms of applications that are really life-altering. All of a sudden, I can meet anybody anywhere, and that was impossible just 3-4 years ago. No matter what company, you think about the different companies and ethical practices and all that, I totally follow that discussion. That's not what I'm thinking about here. It's just the utility of being able to do this is amazing for a blind person.
We have a similar concept another distinction along the same ways, which is the difference between a challenge and resistance. So a challenge is a thing you want to achieve that is difficult. Like, for example, I'm a student pilot. I'm trying to learn to fly a plane. That's a challenge. Resistance is stuff that is getting in the way, the little barriers that slow you down. The difference is when you put more effort into a challenge, you do better. When you put more effort into something that is resistance, it just gets harder. So things like Uber and things like in the UK, the various services that are around that I use, they reduce the resistance in my life so I can use more and more of my energy on challenges that I wish to overcome. Do you have the concept of spoons in America? Have you come across that one?
What's that?
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
So the spoon theory, it comes from a lady called Christine, and it's the idea that when I start the day, I start with 10 spoons. And then everything I do uses spoons as I go through the day. And then some things that I do restore spoons. And it's really important in my life because for years I used to estimate the amount of energy something would take by what I thought it would take. But by using this spoons analogy and monitoring it over time, I got to learn what they actually take. So a week ago, we were out in the car and we were driving back from somewhere and we were deciding what to do for lunch. And in the end, we said, okay, how many spoons do we have? Well, actually, we don't have many spoons. I only have 4 spoons. So with those 4 spoons, we could go into a restaurant and be completely useless the rest of the day, or we could, eat later, eat in an hour's time when I've recovered a bit, and then have a better day. So using spoons as a way to help you make decisions now that will enable you to pace for later is another one of those life changes that I made that was really impactful.
This is Janine, and I want to address one of the panelists' questions, Laura, and that is, I saw it come across, or I should say I heard it come across, that one of the panelists, or one of the audience participants, people in the audience, asked in the chat, what do you find to be your favorite operating system? And this really goes to what Jamie, I think, is talking about in terms of challenge and resistance and the spoon theory. I use whatever operating system is going to work the best for the task that I need to complete. So at the moment, I'm working on a Mac using VoiceOver. To the left of me, I have iOS on an iPhone with VoiceOver. To my right, I have a Windows 10 computer with 2 different screen readers, actually 3 different because of Narrator that comes as part of Windows 10. I have JAWS and NVDA as well on that machine. Behind me, I have an Android phone with TalkBack, which is the Android screen reader. I also have a Braille display that allows me to pair to multiple devices so that I can switch back and forth between these different machines and use my Braille display. So for me, it's not, do I use this operating system or that? It's more about what makes me the most efficient, the most autonomous, the most able to work with the challenges that arise so that I have more spoons at the end of the day to make choices for fun as well.
David, are you going?
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I just was going to say, it's one of the things that I'm getting out of this conversation, and I'm an economist, so I think in these terms anyway, but how much optimization we're all doing in our day. And Jamie, you've got a very practical way of how to manage energy and then learn when you don't appropriately understand how much energy things are taking. I find that I've had to use different size screens at different times in my neuroplasticity. At first, first of all, John Slayton helped me get off the CRT screen onto an LED. I could read, I was picking up the background flash of a CRT screen, and so an LED screen changed quite a bit. At one point, I moved to a much bigger monitor because that helped me organize information. And now I'm finding that my small iPhone is actually much less energy intensive for me, especially because I've had some up and downs of getting sick, and really when I'm not feeling well or really need to be getting better, I need to reduce my technology use in order that my technology is not interfering with just basic health. And I do go through ups and downs in my recovery, so which I want in order to get better, but I don't want I want to optimize my technology so it's interfering with that recovery as much as possible. And given current state of technology, I'd love to be optimizing at the level that Janine is able to optimize. Janine, you're fearless. It's great.
David, did you have anything to add to that? Do you find that mobile is easier for you?
No, I just wanted to point out that, we have a theme going here: optimization, fatigue, energy, and things like this. So that's the important thing the takeaways so far is to, everybody wants to be creative. Everybody wants to be unique. Everybody wants to have fun, on the web, designing the web, providing, things to consumers, but don't exhaust your consumers. Make things simple, make things, simple and intuitive. And that's, that's one of the main reasons why Apple has become such the giant that it has, is because they're all about simple elegance and intuition. And that's the way of the future, is considering the mental energy capacity that people have to get things done and to complete things as fast as possible, as simple as possible. Just, that's the takeaway so far. I just want to point that out.
And just a quick point to that is Brick here again. The reason I got really excited about taking the job that I currently have with BB&T, which is one of the larger banks in the US, somewhere in the top 10, is the position was not an accessibility specialist per se. It was actually part of the user experience team. And, whereas as much as I love making websites accessible to myself, what really makes me excited about accessibility based on my experience is we're really just creating better web experiences for everybody. Accessibility is a slightly different way to looking at the problem, but it's really about optimizing your web experience. It's about reducing the resistance, to use the term I learned today, about getting your transfer or your deposit or whatever you do at the bank quick, easy, and you can do it from your home in your pajamas. You don't have to go anywhere. And I really like the fact that to more and more extent, I think I'm seeing accessibility merge with UX, because accessibility is just a part of UX, and it's all about all-inclusive or universal design and content.
May I talk quickly about how we approach it at the BBC, and one of my favourite stories about how the BBC, why the BBC has to get this right. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it, Jamie.
Okay,
I think it's a good lead-in.
The BBC is a really key cultural place in the UK, and what we do affects the lives of people because it affects the attitudes of people around people. So one of the proudest things at the BBC is that we don't do audits. We have champions in each team, and the work of the accessibility team, which is part of the UX team, is to teach, enable, and support the champions. One of our champions was in children's, and we make lots of children's games. And we got this feedback from children who are autistic or with dyslexia and other learning disabilities or with physical impairments, that the fact that their friends could play the games and they couldn't started them on this path of having a separation, being different. And what we discovered is that when we stopped making accessible games and made all games accessible, we didn't just help the children who had a need for it, we helped everybody. And all of a sudden, those children stopped feeling separate to their friends. They stopped experiencing, they had a sense of belonging. And actually, that was probably the most helpful outcome. Not that they could shoot some character in a game, but they could have an enjoyable experience with their friends where they were no longer different. And I think for so much about accessibility, actually that's the end goal of it, is to have people, to have all types of people to be able to interact and to be able to have great experiences together, and then reducing the resistance between those things. So whilst sometimes accessibility may come down to a screen reader or a specific piece of technology, when you roll out of it, the purpose of the BBC accessibility team is to prevent our users from becoming disabled. So users come to us in all different ways, but it's our coding and our technology and our mistakes that disable them. Sorry, I've kind of ranted a bit there.
That's Jamie, I think that's a really good point, and it ties into what I wanted to clarify, because I think I came across a little different than what I intended when I made my statement about the different operating systems. And so I'm glad that Anne brought this up. What I was really trying to get at is, depending on what you need to do, not everybody works in the field of accessibility, and so you may not need to know or have to work with all these different operating systems. The more important part is to go and try different things to see what actually works best for you. That's going to become your favorite operating system. We're blessed today, in my view, to have a lot of options, and accessibility and UX and design all coming together to work for everyone is a really awesome thing. And because of this, we can go out and try different things and make choices based on what our needs are, as opposed to saying, well, Apple or Android or XYZ is the one you should get. The world is a bigger and brighter place in some ways, but it also allows us to narrow the needs to fit what makes us most efficient.
Great, thank you for wrapping that. back together, Janine, with what Jamie said. Really great points there. I appreciate you adding on to that. So we have one last question here, and it's actually for Jamie, kind of to a point where, you know, what is useful to you when you're working, Jamie? Do you use different style sheets to make reading easier? Are there anything that you use in a working capacity, or anyone else on the panel, any features that you use while you're at work that is helpful to you?
So I do use the reader mode built into Safari a lot to remove distractions, screen zoom, screen readers. Actually, one of the biggest changes we made is that my team tend not to communicate using the phone. So, as I said, I often can't speak. In fact, you're all seeing me in my unusual state of having speech. So if you ever meet me and come up to me and I start signing at you or using my phone, that's why. When I first I had an operation which made my speech worse. And when I first did that, we used to continue operating the same way. So we'd all have a Skype conversation and I'd be there typing and everyone else would be there talking. So I was the person who was disabled the most by the technology. You know, they had 200 times more words than I did. And it didn't flow. It became very frustrating. So what we did is the entire team moved to Slack, where effectively, rather than the impairment being just on me, the impairment was almost shared equally. All of us agree that Slack is kind of awful and it slows us all down. But it slows us all down equally, so therefore communication started to flow. And now, even when my speech is working, knowing that we have Slack to fall back on at any point, we still use Slack all the time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's rarely a single technology that enables me to do something, but more a change of attitudes or a change of approach to look at where the resistance and the barriers are and to move around it as much as push through it.
Great, that's a great answer. I think that is wonderful. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add something really quick. That's a good point. That's something really important to point out. So a lot of times you go to websites and you have the dynamic website and the accessible website, the separate but equal. Here's for people with disabilities, here's for everyone else. What Jamie was talking about is they decided to move towards an environment for everybody to be included together, to be, you know, feel the same way. But when you have accessible versus dynamic websites, you're separating us as consumers, as users, and things like that. And the best example to it that I can think of to show people is Papa John's website in the United States. You go to custom build a Papa John's pizza in the United States on their website. The initial website is very dynamic. It's very visual, very colorful. You can build the pizza in front of you. You see the toppings populated. It's animated. It's cool. It's fun. Then you go to the accessible version, and it's all drop-down menus. It's all for a screen reader. It's robotic. It's mechanical. It's ugly. The way of the future is creating an environment where people with disabilities can utilize the same dynamic website along with our non-disabled peers without having to feel separated but equal.
Mm-hmm.
Nice point.
It's also much cheaper long term.
there you go.
At the BBC, we stopped doing accessible versions because they tended to drift out of date, and then you'd have to have a line item to rebuild the accessible version. One of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of progressive enhancement, that is building applications in layers, is that if the top layer, the JavaScript, isn't working, just turn it off and you've still got a complete experience. So you have an inbuilt method to give an accessible version without really any extra development work. So it's one of the reasons why I like progressive enhancement. But yeah, no, it's with the children's games, it was really amazing to see the social impact on the children was vastly more than we expected. And actually, it really helped encourage us that we were going down the right path. And I think we've got some presentations or white papers or something about that I'm sure I can find somewhere.
Great. Well, we have unfortunately reached the end of our panel. This hour has flown by. I just want to thank all of our panelists for sharing all the different scenarios and situations that they encounter when they're using the web, and also and how we got to that message and that main point of how when developers and designers understand and can empathize with these barriers or these use cases or these scenarios and learn to design the web for everyone, for all users, to make inclusive design, that it really helps everyone, and especially the people who have disabilities, the people on our panel who encounter these scenarios. It's really going to make everything better for everyone. So with that, I want to thank everyone who's attended this panel. We'll be sure to send out all of the resources, the links, the apps that they found useful, and any other resources that were brought up during the webinar. I want to thank everyone for participating, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.